Is it really an academic's, quote, obligation to persecute a fellow academic for disagreeing with feminist doctrine, as Professor of English Jeffrey Jerome Cohen has recently declared on his blog? And why do so many professors seem eager to shame and blame anybody who steps out of line? That's my subject on today's Fiamengo File. I'm Janice Fiamengo of the University of Ottawa. Actually, there is nothing that should surprise us in the willingness of the majority of academics to allow freedom of speech to be suppressed and even to lead the charge in suppressing it in the name of a culturally sanctioned social cause. It has been this way for a long time. Recently, a Facebook friend sent me a link to an article called Snakes and Ladders on Alan Frantzen, Misogyny, and the Problem with Tenure. I'm embarrassed that I didn't know about Alan Frantzen sooner because he's a really interesting dissident academic. Dr. Frantzen was a highly successful and now retired English scholar, a specialist in medieval literature at Loyola University in Chicago. He has provoked near apoplexia with his ridicule of feminist politics and his defense of modern men on a webpage entitled Modern Men and Masculinity, the Struggle to Become a Masculine Man. That's his right, surely, to defend men from feminist propaganda, especially during his retirement? Well, not according to other academics in English Lit who have been clucking and bleating and uttering exclamations of outrage at what are claimed to be his, quote, misogynistic screeds, which are apparently, quote, peppered with the most hackneyed and useless men's rights activist jargon you could imagine, end quote. Actually, Frantzen makes thoughtful, well-reasoned arguments about men and the effects of feminist dogma on his personal blog. But you can't say the same in terms of well-reasoned arguments about his opponents, who mainly confine themselves to sanctimonious expressions of horror, proving perhaps that English studies may be the silliest and most trivial discipline in all of academia. One academic, a man named Jeffrey Jerome Cohen, professor of George Washington University, has made it his personal crusade to spread the word about Frantzen, encouraging as many others as possible to join in the academic pile-on. Cohen has written a blog post entitled Calling Out Misogyny to crow about his success in instigating the war on Frantzen. My favorite part of the post is his just slightly disingenuous statement that, quote, we should be cautious about public shaming and bandwagoning, of course. Yeah, of course. But not if it's a senior male professor attacking feminism. In that case, public shaming and bandwagoning is not only necessary, but righteous. Like all the others he encouraged to take to Twitter to insult and revile Frantzen, Professor Cohen never does bother to bring forward any evidence that Frantzen has, as he claims, quote, filled his website with hatred against women, end quote. It's enough that Frantzen dared to criticize feminism. Cohen seems particularly exercised about a paragraph from Frantzen's website in which Frantzen employed the phrase femfog to define the academic culture of obeisance to feminism. And here it is to give you a flavor for his blog. It's reproduced from the site MGTOW HQ. Quote, let's call it the femfog for short. The sour mix of victimization and privilege that makes up modern feminism and that feminists use to intimidate and exploit men. Some men are so intimidated by feminism that they are afraid to develop a critical attitude towards it. Feminism is enormously powerful. Enormously powerful movements should always be regarded with skepticism and wariness, especially when they are aimed at taking power from you. As Jack Donovan writes, the aim of feminism is to remove men from power. The aim is not to share power with men. Men today live in fem-fog, a thick mist of anti-male propaganda. Many men don't know how to fight it, and some don't even realize that they are fogged up." End quote. It goes on like that. An attack on feminism as an ideology of man-blaming. It's not an attack on women, and neither Professor Cohen, who finds it, quote, appalling, nor the author of the original article that I read, writer and academic Joe Livingston, well, they just can't accept that a smart fellow like Frantzen, and a progressive gay scholar to boot, they can't accept that he can really think that way, or think he could get away with it. He must have gone mad, Livingston speculates in the article. Well, I've got news for the two of them. There are quite a number of academics, male and female, who think the way Frantzen does, but the enforced monopoly on moral rectitude in the academy has kept people in ignorance of it. Now it's out there, and these upholders of politically approved thought are thrashing around in impotent indignation. You see, the problem for Cohen and Livingston and others is that Frantzen is retired, and therefore he's largely beyond the reach of the thought censors they'd so much like to muster. Professor Cohen is quoted as lamenting that with tenure, quote, "it is easy to drift into some scary places without reality checks to bring you back," end quote. Does he mean the reality check of being disciplined for holding incorrect views? I'd be willing to wager that what brought Frantzen to anti-feminism was the reality check of actually reading a lot of very bad published feminist scholarship. I've done it. I could give you loads of examples. Frantzen's emergence as a writer of anti-feminist posts, that came not because he had tenure and therefore didn't have to engage with the world, but because he had a mind of his own, and now he has the opportunity to air his views. I'll bet it's intensely annoying to realize that a former colleague is now beyond the reach of the usual control mechanisms of academia, the social shaming, the potential Title IX investigations. But even when Frantzen was a professor, he almost certainly couldn't have been fired for his incorrect attitudes, and that's starting to bother the academic Puritans amongst us. Joe Livingston, for example, laments that, quote, "the tenured, particularly men, are exempt from the kind of character scrutiny to which ordinary employees are subjected," end quote. It's remarkable to find self-described progressive people calling for character scrutiny for professors. It sounds like something out of Victorian times, like, "We hope Professor Sandwell is a respectable man, moderate in his habits, prudent, correct in his opinions, and regular in church attendance," and so on. It's clear from the remarks of Professor Cohen and the author of the article that these individuals would love to be able to sanction their colleagues for thinking incorrectly about feminism. I've noticed that even the once standard expressions of support for free speech are now falling away from these kinds of comments, revealing an ever more nakedly expressed demand for ideological conformity. Well, as I mentioned last day, we shouldn't be at all surprised by any of this. History shows us that there have always been plenty of intellectuals like Professor Jeremy Cohen willing to give obedient and even zealous support for totalitarianism. For many intellectuals, nothing is more satisfying than to fall in line with an attractive orthodoxy, so long as lots of their fellow intellectuals are doing the same and that rewards and power come their way as a result. The German universities of the 19th and early 20th centuries had been at the forefront of higher education with a strong tradition of free inquiry and the pursuit of truth. They were celebrated worldwide, in fact, for their openness to debating ideas. All of that changed in the 1930s. As National Socialism became the official ideology of the German nation after the election of the National Socialist Party in March of 1933, Nazism also became the reigning ideology of the German universities. Some few professors protested this development, a few even resigning their positions, but many more, reluctantly or eagerly, adapted themselves to the new realities, taking advantage of the opportunities for security and advancement that were offered to them. Stephen Remy's book, The Heidelberg Myth, The Nazification and Denazification of a German University, published in 2003, makes a case study of Heidelberg University to show how readily the vast majority of the university's highest-ranking professors aligned themselves with the new regime. Some had already joined the Nazi Party prior to the regime takeover in 1933, and many others were quick to express their sympathy with the regime's nationalist ideals. They were happy to abandon objective scholarship in favor of preparing German minds for the Nazi project. The author shows how even before the government-imposed dismissal of all Jewish civil servants in April of 1933, radical student leaders had already begun to harass and boycott their non-Aryan colleagues. Then between 1933 and 1938, Heidelberg was purged of nearly 1/3 of its instructors, mostly Jewish instructors. Other instructors went into a kind of inner exile of silence, and many ambitious younger scholars took the opportunity to advance into the newly vacated positions. Professors of law, biology, medicine, sociology, German literature, and history embraced the new mandate that all research and teaching must serve the German Volk, just as many professors today are happy to bend their research and teaching to serve radical social justice ideology, including misandric feminism and anti-white propaganda. So how does this happen? And are intellectuals particularly prone to such willing ideological servitude? Well, to some extent they are. Many intellectuals, while enjoying a privileged position in society and often convinced of their mental and even moral superiority, are also quite aware, often resentfully so, of the tenuousness of their billet. Intellectuals are often not particularly prepossessing individuals. They know a lot about one extremely narrow area of research, and often that's all they know. Many develop their intellectual capacity far out of proportion to other capacities, including social skills, leadership skills, communication skills, and knowledge of self and others. Often their area of expertise is so specialized that they can discuss it with only a small group of other specialists, and it is often a subject that the general public finds mystifying or even off-putting. That makes the intellectuals feel weak and unimportant. Unlike the other major pillars of our social world, the soldiers, builders, creators, merchants, healers, and political and religious leaders, the elite intellectual class maintains its status only so long as society's secular and religious rulers validate the intellectual work these academics do. Despite what they conventionally say about their status as dissenters, even as rebels against the status quo, they are intensely aware that their high status depends on the indulgence of the ruling elite, of political leaders, and the media. They are therefore very sensitive to shifts in the political ideological landscape. What these intellectuals have detected and what they or their forerunners contributed to creating has been a weakening, a disastrous weakening of faith in the pursuit of knowledge as a sufficient rationale for the existence of universities. As the kinds of truth universities once upheld, religious truth first of all, then humanistic truth, objective scientific truth, as those truths came under fire by postmodernists and social radicals in the 1960s, they came to be seen as inadequate. University learning, it was thought, had to be about more than the traditional disciplines. It had to be about a larger morality. And because other forms of morality had been jettisoned by the social elite, the new morality was social justice, the elimination of racism and sexism and colonialism. So academics fell in line with the social justice cause, some because they wanted to, some because they felt they had to, some because it was easier to go along than to resist, and the career inducements were many. Gradually, social justice became not just one good to be balanced against other goods, such as knowledge and open debate, but it became the primary, preeminent good, superior to all others. And we come to the point where social justice trumps everything else, including freedom of conscience, freedom of expression, the presumption of innocence, the equal treatment of all students, and of course, the pursuit of knowledge. It's a grim situation in which all manner of ridiculous inequities and injustices can and do flourish. In the next videos, we will look in more depth at the appeal of social justice ideology, the power it exercises over individuals on campus, and the terrible consequences for university life and academic work.